Black women out here living our best life, and we gonna talk about it on the Cute Shoes channel. What's up, y'all? You just tuned in to the Cute Shoes channel, your virtual hangout spot on the chill side of the internet. Your host is Dr. Akua Rose Feathers, and she is going to guide you through the legacy-making brilliance, vulnerability, and awesomeness of Black women. Oh, this is not just a web channel. This is a spotlight, a stage and sanctuary for the rich mosaic of experiences, dreams, and triumphs of Black women. So, kick off your shoes, grab your favorite drink, and chill with us as we dive into some real talk. Let me tell you who's on the show today. On today's show is Sandtrice Russell, a licensed professional counselor with over 18 years of experience in the helping profession. Her journey into the world of mental health started as a result of coping with unresolved abandonment issues and childhood trauma in her child and adolescent years. She was raised by her paternal great-grandmother and paternal great-aunt, while her biological father and mother both battled drug addiction in the midst of the 80s crack epidemic. Her mom was in prison during those critical years of early childhood, and being abandoned by both parents left her with some serious attachment issues that impacted all her future relationships. She decided at a young age that she wanted to help other people who had a rough start to their lives overcome the challenges that they faced, and she dedicated her life and career to doing just that. She specializes in working with clients coping with depression, anxiety, relationship issues, anger management, trauma, and individuals of the LGBT community who are seeking a safe space. Let's get to that conversation.
Y'all get excited with me and welcome Sandtrice D. Russell, LPC.
Hey, what's going on?
What is going on? I'm beyond excited to talk with you. I had an opportunity to look through all of your work that you've shared, publicly, and even reading your bio, and I'm so intrigued and so inspired and so just encouraged by just the story that I've learned of you, and I want to talk more and learn more. So,
Yay. Well, thank you. Definitely grateful to be here.
yes, I'm super loving it. One thing that really stood out to me, like so much stood out to me, but we talked about it in the little pre-conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You have a podcast. What's the name of your podcast, please?
Well, it's called Self-Aware and Fucked Up. So,
Yes.
that kind of says it all, I think.
It does. But I love how you name that two things can be true at once. So
Exactly.
can you tell me the beginning, like what motivated you to start that, and the what is the essence of what you talk about on the
Gotcha.
podcast?
Gotcha. So I was kind of motivated to start a podcast. I was looking for a title. I wanted to be able to create a space where we could really talk about taboo topics in the mental health field. As we know, African Americans, Black community, we have historically not been people that were running to therapy. And so I wanted to create a space. One, I can't see everyone, but I wanted to create a space for individuals to be able to learn about different things that maybe they were not knowledgeable of. And so when I was fishing out and kind of trying to brainstorm podcast ideas, I was like, yeah, I'm really a self-aware person. I go to therapy, I do all of the right things. I am a therapist, all of that. But I make fucked up decisions a lot of the times, even though I know that what I'm doing is wrong. And I feel like a lot of people do that. We can know that things are just totally not the right choice for us to make, but we still do it. So it's about being able to acknowledge the fact that we can be very much intentional and very knowledgeable of the things that are going on in our lives, but we don't always get it right because life is not perfect and we're not perfect people. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. No, sorry, I was amping you because
Okay.
and I want to drill into that a little bit more, because when you have the expertise that you have, and the background that I have and my credentials and all the things, I literally just got through a situation where I was working with someone professionally and was triggered somebody, was harmful towards me. And so it triggered something from my childhood, and it just sent me in this space, and I had to activate all my tools. And they literally asked me, well, why are you not doing all your wellness stuff? And why are you not doing all of this? Right. So speak to that a little bit more, if you will, like, just because we have the knowledge here and the practice, and even in some of it is even in here, life still be life in,
Right.
and there's levels to this.
Yeah, there's definitely levels to it. And I think that, a lot of times what happens is when you get into that situation where you're triggered, usually if you're not using those coping skills on the front end, by the time you get to that point where you're at that boiling point, it's already too late for all of that to work anyway. Like, you have to put those things into practice in order to not have yourself be as responsive or reactive to the triggers. So someone telling you to just do those things that you normally do, it doesn't work like that, because now when you get triggered, you go back, you regress back to that former state. And it's like almost like you're reliving it over and over again. And so it's kind of hard to just just do what you've been doing, because it's not effective in those moments where you have not been putting it into practice. And also, when you're going back to a former state, your brain is not computing, this is what I should be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to hear your response to this, because in those spaces, you might have, become an expert in yourself, in your wellness journey, according to the things you've experienced. But when something new happens and it triggers you, that's the essence of a trigger. It's unexpected. And, then it takes you to a new place, and maybe something that you healed, or that you were healing, or you resolved. It triggers it in a new space and in a new way. And then you have to learn to deal with it from that space. What's your response to that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are all having to learn situations that as they come. You may have had I talk a lot about my relationship with my mom, because it's been very, very up and down throughout my life. And so in that, something my mom may have done or said when I was in my teenage years, I may have just ignored it, because I really wasn't emotionally responsive during those years. I didn't cry. I didn't start crying until I got to college or whatever. But when I got to college and I started, to really just connect with myself and realize, I didn't have to hold all of that shit in all of those years. I could have said what I wanted to say. Whereas now, me being triggered by something that my mom does, my response is completely different, because back then I didn't have boundaries, but now I have boundaries. And so my response is just like, you know what? I don't want to cry about it. I don't want to, necessarily go back to just ignoring you or whatever. I'm just going to choose my own happiness. So when you're triggered by things, depending on the season of life that you're in, when that occurs, your response is going to be different. So you just have to kind of know where you are and recognize that all things don't fit you can't fit a square thing into a round hole. Like, you have to be willing to just assess where you are right now in this moment and make a choice based on that.
That part. So I want to, if you don't mind, let's kind of I don't want to say rewind, but kind of step back into some of that space where we talk about those, like, that first family, our family of origin, that space where we grew up. And again, I'm going to ask this question as a statement and just kind of understand your response to it.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that we experience in our childhood are like seeds. We are like fresh soil when we're children. And so these things that happen in our childhood, unknowingly, a lot of times, they're planted in the soil of our minds and our hearts and our souls, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then it's like you said, then we grow up, and then things start to bloom in these really interesting ways. So speak to kind of your response to that, and how somebody could be 60 and something from their childhood blooms or, blossoms because they were unaware of it. And I know that's a big question, so just speak to it however it strikes you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we are shaped from the time that we're born. I know I was shaped, and kind of what came to mind as you were speaking about that just then was just kind of seeing those dynamics of, people learn like how to be. They learn a lot of times as children, we learn those expectations of what society puts on us through our parents. We're taught, you're supposed to act a certain way. You're supposed to be seen and not heard.
Oh my goodness.
When you go back to those dynamics of what that really means, and then
Yes.
growing up through that in your life, and then realizing, like, where is my voice? Why can't I be heard? Why is what I feel not important? Because I mean,
Yes.
we're changing that dynamic now. I see a lot of newer parents that give their children voices,
Yes.
but when you think about back in the day, I was raised during the 80s and 90s, like, there was no voice. You did not have a choice in anything in your life or whatever. You were expected to go to school. I know I was expected to go to school, get good grades, don't be out there messing around with boys, don't get pregnant, go to college, do all of these things. There was a whole to-do list. And, I probably only did 2 things on that to-do list that they set out for me. But even in a grander scheme, I've worked with clients over time who have, they carry that over into their adult life, and they never evolve from those childhood expectations and become themselves. It's still a mirror of, this is what my mom wants me to do. This is what my dad wants me to do. This is what society wants me to do. And they still don't have a voice. And so I like to just push people to, like, just be yourself, do what feels good for you. Fuck expectations. Just set your own expectations, set your own intentions. And that's what I kind of live my life by.
Yeah, I'm over here, right? Like so many things that you're saying, I'm like, ooh, ask this question, ask the question. So much that you're saying. And so I'm probably going to jump around a little bit, because you said, okay, I'm gonna ask this one first. So when you talk about those things, first of all, people are different. And so I might say, because everything you said, I can totally relate to. And I might say, well, I went through the same thing and I came out fine. Okay, great.
Right.
Congratulations. Like, I'm really glad for you. So people are different. What is the impact? What was the impact for you? I'll ask you to speak to your experience. What was the impact for you? Because we're talking about the relationships and how those relationships kind of lend to identity, or we kind of blossomed into that piece of the conversation. So what was that impact on you as you were recognizing it? Not so much while you were living it, because I heard you say you weren't really like aware of the things that were happening when they're happening, but as you began to aware, did you start to have like resentment or anger or frustration or disappointment? How did those things show up as you began to realize some of those seeds that were planted were not necessarily like the best?
Yeah, I think that I definitely had a certain level of resentment in my early 20s, because I was still figuring myself out. I grew up Southern Baptist, and definitely raised by my great grandmother, was in church every single Sunday, every Tuesday for Bible study, Wednesday for choir practice. I was there pretty much every day of the week, and that was my
Thursday for
life.
teachers meeting, Friday for service, Sunday for evangelism.
Yes, so it's kind of like, that's how I was raised. That's how I was reared. I was supposed to grow up and be this, that, and the other. And then I started to realize when I was about 18 and 19 that I was not going to fit into this mold, because there were just parts of me that didn't align with my upbringing. I ended up finding out, through exploration, that, I'm a lesbian. And that part of my journey was not something that my Southern Baptist great grandmother could handle. And so I remember coming out and going to church with them, and, oh, well, you just got to pray. You just got to get on the altar. You got to give it to God. You got to do all of that. And I'm just like, okay, but I'm hurting. I am dealing with suicidal thoughts because I'm driving and leaving Bible study, and I'm in the car driving, want to drive my car off the side of the road because I'm unhappy. I'm trying to live this heteronormative life and be the person that's in church on the altar and speaking in tongues and doing all of that. I'm trying to be that person, but I'm unhappy because I'm not living in my truth. And so I did have a lot of resentment. I started to feel like, why am I here to live up to your expectations? Why do I have to cry myself to sleep at night in order to be able to feel love from a God that you say this, that, or the other about, and he doesn't like this and he doesn't like that? So a lot of it was just like anger, because it's like, okay, well, if this is me, and you say God loves everybody and he will do this and he will do that, why can't God love me the way that I am? And so it was a lot of that fighting to get to that point where I got secure enough in my own spiritual relationship to build that and not have to rely on someone else's idea of what they translated it to mean. And then also being able to just live my life unapologetically. That was a lot. It was a lot to get to that point of just being okay with being me and not living up to my great grandmother's expectations or my aunt's expectations or my mom's expectations. So it was definitely a journey of pain, tears, resentment, all of that shit. It was hard.
Yeah, there's definitely a journey, and you tell me where you're comfortable going as this conversation evolves.
We can go wherever you want to go.
Want to
I'm
do
open.
it? Okay.
Yes.
So because so much of what you're saying, I'm telling you, is hitting home. Like, for me, so I identify as queer, and for me, in the same way, I would be in these Bible studies. And let me tell you, Sandtrice, I was teaching and I was preaching and I was singing and I was leading.
Same.
And I had this vision of myself on this huge stage and this huge platform. And in my mind, because of the things in the presence that I had in the church, I envisioned that it would be, preaching and teaching and all of those things on these large stages. And I was heartbroken. I was devastated because I knew that in order to do those things, I would have to continue to quiet myself. And it was the relationships that I had that encouraged me to quiet myself, to squash who I knew that I am and pretend that I wasn't.
Right.
And that journey that you talked about, I ask people at the end of it, but what would you say to someone just right now, right off the cuff? And I'm gonna stretch the question out just so you'll have time to prepare for advice to somebody who's in that same space, that's living with that dichotomous existence where that you've got this, influence from family, and you've got this church, and you've got this, God and this religion that's telling you that you can't be this way, but it is your reality. I lived so strongly that I'm stretching out a little bit more, and I'm probably about 5'3" I lived with such shame. I lived with such guilt. And it was such a weight because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to pursue it. And I was so fearful that somebody would catch me. I hadn't had a relationship at that point, hadn't had a girlfriend, hadn't had, it was the, traditional hetero relationships. What would you say to a person who's in that place, who's in that space, who's wrestling, who's struggling, who's scared? What would you say to them right now to just encourage them to start the journey you just described taking?
Yeah. I would say you have to, one, be honest with yourself first and foremost. You have to get to that place of acceptance, because when you're going through coming out, we can talk about the whole identity development piece of it, but you also go through a certain level of grief around it, because it's accepting a part of your life that you did not expect. You were raised to be a certain way, and now you have to grieve the loss of what you thought you were supposed to be, and then start to accept who you are. And if you're struggling with the religious part of it, you really have to develop your own prayer life. You really have to get in contact with your higher power or your source, whatever that looks like for you, God, universe, Buddha, it doesn't matter. You have to find out what that is, and you have to get to know and develop a relationship for yourself, not what you heard through someone. And then you have to make peace with that part of yourself, because you will never have peace as long as you're trying to live two lives. The two cannot exist together. So you have to be willing to, just understand that this is a part of who you are. It doesn't have to be your entire life. You don't have to lead with, hey, I'm gay, hey, I'm bisexual. You don't have to lead with that. That's a part of your identity. It does not have to be your complete identity. Just really leaning into who you are as a person who identifies as, Christian, lesbian, whatever, whatever, this, that, and other. One of the greatest lessons that I ever learned about God and about the universe or whatever is that when you focus on the 10 commandments, there are 2 of those commandments that reign supreme for me and that I live my life by. And you sum up the first 5 and the last 5, is love God, love God's people, be a good person, live by the fruits of the spirit. Like, just reconcile that within yourself and just accept yourself as you are, because you can't expect other people to start to accept you if you're still wrestling wrestling and battling with that yourself. And just know that the world is not going to necessarily accept you like you. We're moving so far backwards in terms of the
No,
political realm right now.
say
Know that you
that.
may not be accepted, or you may not be, as loved as you would think you should have been. But find your own tribe in that. There are so many
Yes.
people in the queer community out there to support you. And so just really honing in on the fact that it really has to be about you and not other people's perception or expectations about who they think you should be. Just
Yeah.
learn to love yourself and dig into that.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. And as you were talking, I was envisioning this progression, someone coming from having those seeds planted relationally. If you talk about the relationships that you have, the seeds planted as a child, and then you start to learn that not only do you have familial expectations, then you have spiritual expectations. Then you learn that you have societal expectations. And there's a whole lot to reckon with, and there's a whole lot to reconcile. So the words that you just said were very, very powerful. It starts with self. What would be your recommendation for even somebody who's not LGBT or who's not questioning or who's not, for any person in general, what would be your recommendation to start that journey towards self-knowledge, not self-acceptance, not self-love, not self-healing? I just want to know me. I want to be able to differentiate between my small voice and I still hear grandmama's voice, or I still hear society's voice. What would be your recommendation for starting that journey?
Yeah, I think for me, it would start with just assessing your values and really kind of looking at what are the things that are important to you. Are you drawn to, not what things mom, grandma, any of those have told you are right. What are you drawn to? I do think also journaling is a really good part of being able to differentiate those voices, because a lot of times we're trying to battle things in our head and voices, not schizophrenic voices, just regular voices, and that inner critical voice that a lot of us deal with. We're trying to navigate that and we can't tell the difference. So getting it out on paper, I know people like the e-journals, that's cool. I'm old school. I like to just journal with my pen and paper because it is just so important. It's just something different about it when you're able to just get those stream of consciousness thoughts out of your head and really tap into who you are. What do you like? Outside of everything else or whatever. And once you tap into those, setting some goals for yourself about what are the things that are most meaningful to you and how do you want to go about accomplishing some of those things. So I think it really truly has to start with just getting this stuff up here out on paper, pen, paper, all of that stuff. And then really what are my values? Do I want to have kids? Do I want a family? Do I want to go to college? What does my life look like? What do I want it? What do I want my friend relationships to look like? Family relationships to look like? Really just diving into those things. I work with clients a lot on trying to help them figure that out. And usually what I will start with is truly a values assessment, because so often our values and our core beliefs are tied into what we are taught, not what we necessarily desire for ourselves.
Yeah. And that's really good stuff. And I will only say, because we keep using the word journey, it is a journey. It's not something that you can expect. Okay, I'm gonna sit down Friday, I'm gonna get my journal, and then on Sunday morning I'm gonna be good.
Right. Definitely a journey.
Right. And so how do I take care of myself in that journey? How what is your recommendation for how because it's not and there are going to be some things that you discover that do kind of, comport with what grandmama taught you or what mama taught you, what daddy taught you. And then there's going to be some things that a little nuance, a little different. It's going to be some things that are completely and totally different. And you mentioned it before that there's some grieving involved in that process. There's also some anger and some frustration and some irritation. And how do I take care of myself? Or how does that person take care of themselves along that journey? Because you've got to reconcile what you're learning about yourself that's new. And I don't want to start hating and be like, well, she didn't know what she's talking about. I don't want to start judging those who, taught those things to me. How do I take care of myself through all that's going to come up in that space?
Yeah. I mean, I think a very heavy emphasis on self-care from the perspective of doing things to self-soothe for yourself. Making sure that you take the time to reflect, be intentional about what you desire. But another piece of that is really just being able to identify what are the good things that I learned that I want to keep? And what are the things that I want to discard? Because not everything that I was taught when I was a kid did I discard. I still pray. I still speak in tongues. I still praise and worship, not in the church setting, but I still do those self-care things that are important to me from that particular era of my life. So you just have to decide, what do I want to take and what do I want to leave? And it's not to be disrespectful of someone else's beliefs, but it is their beliefs. So really picking and choosing what works for you. And also developing a self-care routine, making sure you have a good support system. I can never stress the social self-care piece enough, because it is so important. Sometimes we feel like, oh, well, friends, we don't need that aspect because we have this or whatever. But like when we talk about dimensions of wellness, we're looking at, social self-care, work self-care, making sure that we are spiritual self-care. All of those things work together to make us a functional human being, as functional as we can be given our circumstances. So I think that there just has to be the emphasis on building a self-care plan that works for you and speaks to what you need in your life at any given moment. And I always reevaluate my self-care plan as well. Like, does this still work for me? Because some of the stuff that worked for me a year ago, that's no longer for me because I've evolved. So you just have to make sure that it's the right time for whatever it is you're doing and practicing.
You're hitting so many points. I'm like, we only gonna be here for 45 minutes to an hour. Like, how can we do this a little bit longer? You're hitting so many good points. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Because this is a process, because it is a journey, because there's reevaluation, that's the reason why somebody could still be self-aware and fucked up.
Right.
Like, because we are in a process, we are moving through this thing, learning and growing as we go. So that's it's super powerful. I also like how you mentioned that we're not disrespect. I've been scribbling notes all over the place on this thing. So I'm like, which one do I go to? Not disrespecting those that came before us, because the reality is what they gave us was what they had.
Exactly.
Right? Full stop. So it wasn't, I don't believe, and I'm just going to say this just because, of the variables of humanity, that for the most part, many of our guardians, parents, I forget the other word to say, but many of the people of our family of origin, it is from a good place. It is from the best place that they could access.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to be disrespectful. I'm not going to judge, except to say, I don't want that. I'm not going to decide that, oh, they're awful, they're terrible, they're da 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 da. No, it's I don't need that piece. I don't want that piece for myself. I also love how you talked about reevaluating. How do you know that you need to reevaluate? How do you know that it's time to be like, wait a minute, this used to be cool, but
if it ain't working, if it's not working, you need to do something different. Like, I'm a reality therapist. I'm a William Glasser girl. So what are you doing? If what you're doing is not working, then it is time to make a change. So if you feel yourself being burned out, you're seeing all of those signs, you're feeling more anxious, more depressed, you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to hang out with friends, you don't want to do the things that typically brought you happiness, it's time for you to do something else. It's time for you to reevaluate what your goals are and what you need in your day-to-day life, because it will change. The things I wanted to do 2 weeks ago, I probably don't want to do right now, because you just evolve as a person. You grow, and you should be growing. It's normal to outgrow those things. Don't feel like, oh, I'm not doing the right things because you outgrow it. It just means that now your muscles are a little bit stronger, and you need to add a little bit more weight. You just got to add a little bit something different.
And ain't it funny how we expect advancement in so many areas of our lives? Like, when I first started out in the working world, I was making like, I think, $12 an hour. And so as you get higher up in my career, I'm making significantly more.
Right.
And I expect that. Same thing with the way we eat. When we are babies, we go from milk to little like juicy foods like applesauce, and then we start chewing stuff, and then we eat, steak and lobster, right? But when it comes to us, why is it that people think we're supposed to just stay the same? One of the biggest phrases that used to just shake me to my core is, you sure change. I'm supposed to, friend.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
I'm supposed to. I want to shift a little bit, if you're okay with it. Because we talked about, you mentioned earlier, the truth that, for a long time, Black people, and for good reason, were shying away from therapy. We wasn't trying to hear it, wasn't trying to see it. And also there was some misconceptions, like it was, like we said, two things can be true at once. It was true and it was reasonable. And there was also some misconceptions. But now it's starting to become more prevalent. It's starting to become more realized, more accepted, more acceptable. If I'm new to therapy, right now, mind you, I've been in therapy for a number of years because I was like, got to, need to, want to, right? Let's just pretend. I don't know. I'm new to it. I'm thinking about it. It's starting to sound more and more like it's something I want to do. This is a two-parter. It sounds like it's going to be a two-parter. What can I expect? And how do I find, a therapist that's right for me? And you can answer that in any order that, yeah.
Gotcha. So when you go into therapy for the first time, the main thing that you should expect is just to be able to share your story with someone who is a neutral person who is able to just kind of sit with you in that space, help you create a plan for your life in terms of what are the goals that you want to do, what do you want to accomplish from therapy, and also making sure that your information is confidential. So I always tell people the first therapy session is like dating. Not like you're trying to date your therapist, but it's really like you're trying to see if this person is a good fit. Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel safe with this person? Or is it a little bit awkward? Does it not feel like, okay, this person is someone that I feel like I could share my life with? Because that's what you do. You share the most intimate details of your life with your therapist in a space where you're not, being judged, and you're also, it's private. You don't have to worry about a therapist running and telling your business. So I think that, just approaching it from the perspective of what am I looking for? Do I want a Black therapist? Do I want a therapist that specializes in this? Do I want a therapist that specializes in depression, anxiety, trauma? Like, what is it that I'm looking for from a therapist? And the best place to start, honestly, plug for them, is Psychology Today, because you can type in whatever you're looking for in terms of a therapist. If you're looking for a gay therapist, they don't post it out there like, oh, this is a gay therapist. But, on my profile, it does say if someone is looking for a gay therapist, I would come up in that search or whatever. So it's just a matter of like typing what you're looking for in your local area. Of course, with the whole therapy thing, they have to be licensed in the state that you live in. So you definitely don't want to be in New Jersey looking for a therapist in Georgia unless they're dual licensed. So just being sure that what you're looking for fits the need for what you desire, and then just court them. You don't have to, stay married to the first therapist that you go to. There are a lot of great therapists out there, but there are also a lot of horrible therapists out there. So you got to find your fit. My therapist and I have gelled together about 4 years now, and like you just have to know if this is your person or not. So don't feel like just because you go for one session, you're obligated to stick with that therapist. Shop around, find what fit works for you.
Yes. And I love that. And 100% can relate and agree. I've had a couple of bad therapist relationships. I love the analogy that you're drawing, because it's something that I think people can draw from as well, that what it's like to date somebody and realize, oh, we're not a good match. Same thing with the therapist. We're not a good match. Yeah. And that's okay. I don't want to stop talking to you. When did we start? What we in? I am so good at keeping up with time, but I done lost track of time. Okay, we good. We still got some time. Yeah, I love that analogy of dating. And in this space, and I'd love to hear your reaction to this statement. In this space, I think trust yourself is a good phrase to go by. I had an experience with a therapist where it was clear that I was doing too much educating. I would say something that was, and this wasn't a Black woman, this was a white woman, and I would say something that I was experiencing. I think I was like, oh, my daughter's just getting on my nerves. And she was like, and when she gets on your nerves, do you want to hurt her? I'm like, wait a minute, what? Did we, how? How did we jump there? And I just felt like I believed, and I didn't have any, this was a fairly new part of my journey in seeking therapy. And I was just like, that didn't make me comfortable, the way that we jumped to that question. And so then I had to tell her, well, no, she doesn't really get on my nerves. That's just a phrase that we kind of say, in my community.
I gotcha.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm just breaking it down
Yeah.
to her, and I'm just like, So, just kind of your reaction to that, trusting yourself. I didn't have a lot of data to go by to know that it wasn't a logical jump, but I felt something. What is your
Yeah.
reaction and response to that?
Nah, it just, well, my first response was, yeah, I've never gone to a white therapist. It just would not ever be my first thing. And
I
no
didn't
disrespect
know.
to
I
them. That
didn't
is
know.
that's something that whatever. And I teach classes on cultural competency to avoid things like this.
Yes.
But it's like, you know, I'm wondering so many things, like what she knew, what was going on or whatever, because a lot of therapists are also, prone to jump to the suicide piece or the, homicide piece, just because there's discomfort around talking about those things if you've never worked in suicide prevention. So it's so many thoughts or whatever. But the first thing is like cultural competency in therapy. And there is a lack of it just throughout the field itself. And so I would say, again, there's nothing wrong with seeing a counselor that is of a different race, but for BIPOC people, because one, you're not gonna have choices. Not enough of us out there for every Black person to see a Black therapist. It's just not realistic, but whatever. But it's okay to ask your therapist, like, hey, how much experience do you have working with, this population? How much, you just want to make sure that they are comfortable in this, and it's not going to be a situation where you are having to constantly educate them about something that they should do the research on outside of the therapy hour.
Yes, I love that. So many nuggets. Don't be afraid to ask. And I was very new, like I said, to the journey of looking for therapy, and I didn't realize the importance of and the sacredness of that space, and how necessary for me, to the point that you made. There are some amazing therapists out there of multiple nationalities, backgrounds, races, social categorizations, etc. For me, I've found success in the therapists that mirrored me in some way or the other, some significant way or the other. In fact, it was my first therapist that helped me to own my queerness, and also to walk me through what you just named. That don't have to be all that I am. It's just a part of who I am. It's like you taste a cake and you be like, oh, I can taste the nutmeg, and oh, I can taste the this. It's just the pieces of me. I started to sing it, but I've been yelling and my voice ain't gonna come through. The pieces of me, right? Where can we find you? Where can we find you? Do so. I look at all the people who I'm planning to talk to, and I have to say, I was awestruck by all the amazing ways you show up in the world. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that you exist. I have to say that to you.
Thank you.
I really am, in the space that you hold and the story that you have, because to me, I believe that equips you with a special type of empathy for people who come to you, and that safe space that you talked about. I believe that what you lived and what you live helps you to create that safe space for people. So how can we find you? How can we connect with you? How can we hear from you, learn from you, grow with you? Where can we go?
Gotcha. All right. So the main stop would be uniquedestiny.org online. That is the website for my company, Unique Destiny Inc. and Unique Destiny Counseling. All of the information and links to the podcast, Self-Aware and After podcast, as well as any of the workshops that I do for around cultural competency. All of that information is on there. And also you can follow me on all social media platforms under the handle Tree, the LPC. So it's Tree like a tree, THELPC. So I'm very reachable in terms of like social media, as well as just going to the website and filling out a contact form if you want more information.
A wealth of knowledge. If it wasn't clear in just this conversation alone, go visit her website. You're gonna see that Tree the LPC is not one to be played with. Like, you out here for real. I'm gonna ask you one more time. Usually you've already done this, so you might be like, just rewind it and hear what I said before.
Okay, now
but at the end, okay, cool. At the end, I love to invite my guests to have the final say. So we talked about so much. So I'm just going to ask you whatever comes up for you as a final word of advice, a final word of healing, a final word of direction, guidance, whatever comes up for you. What is your offering for the person who's listening to this today?
Yeah. Gotcha. So I'm going to take it back to something that was instilled in me in college. I went to a PWI and I was part of the Black Student Alliance there. And our mantra or our motto was know thyself, be thyself, and express thyself. So that is what I live my life through, just being able to do all of those three things. And also to just add a little cherry on the top, just be your fucking self.